Whenever I talk about rogue decks coming into tournaments, what I mean is a deck that nobody's going to expect. It's almost built just to go against the metagame. It wouldn't be good anywhere else except for at a place where everyone's using a similar deck. It'll contain cards that aren't normally used or that most people don't even remember what they do, and you'll use unconventional strategies that your opponent isn't expecting. This is a deck that I call Sinkhole, and I built it for that exact reason. Just to be the shittiest opponent that your opponent has ever come up against in this format. It has some unexpected cards in it that were underused at the time, like Dark Gloom and Dark Dugtrio, that made it difficult for your opponent to predict what's going to happen on your side of the field. And it also plays equally well against no matter what deck you're facing. Now, it might not always play spectacularly, but it is consistent. It'll stack special conditions on your opponent. It'll make them second guess swapping out to remove those special conditions. It'll make them think about whether it's more important to stay in and take poison damage or retreat to the bench and possibly take sinkhole damage. This deck is fun. No matter if you win or lose, it's just straight up fun to play. So let's get into what makes up this sinkhole deck and why it's so much fun to play. The Pokemon spread in this deck is going to come in threes just so you have more room for trainers and more room to spread around these different effects depending on what you need at the time. So 3 Diglett, 3 Dark Dugtrio. Dark Dugtrio Sinkhole ability forces your opponent to flip a coin every time they retreat to their bench. If they flip a tails, that's 20 damage on that Pokemon, which is a solid chunk of damage in a format where your best Pokemon usually have 70 HP. There's also running 3 Oddish in this deck. Rocket Oddish is actually pretty good. It's got 50 HP, which is pretty high for a Pokemon in this set. And then also 3 Dark Gloom. Dark Gloom has an ability that can possibly confuse your opponent. You're flipping a coin, and if heads, your opponent's confused. If tails, your active is confused. And that can backfire on your part, but we'll get to that in a bit. Drowsy has a very similar ability, that long distance hypnosis, where you flip a coin, and if heads, your opponent goes to sleep. If tails, your active goes to sleep. These effects are so great because you can have 3 Gloom on your bench, or alternatively 3 Drowsy, any combination, and for each one you can use its ability. So you can actually keep flipping until your opponent is either asleep or confused. I do note that a Pokemon can't be asleep and confused at the same time, so sometimes you have to pick between those. 3 copies of the Boss's Way to help you get out that Dark Dugtrio or the Dark Gloom that you need on your bench. Full heals to cover when your active becomes confused or asleep. And then Challenge, so that you can challenge your opponent. If they accept, you can fill up your bench with Diglett, Oddish, Drowsy, whatever it is. You can actually, one of the best plays is to fill it up with Drowsy. That way you can use that long distance hypnosis really quickly, really early in the game, and you can get 3 coin flips from it. So you have 3 chances to put your opponent to sleep. Pokemon Trader is in here because if you end up with Dugtrios or Glooms in your hand before you can get the Diglett or Oddish, you want to swap those out for the basic in the deck. And then Professor Oak will just help you get back whatever evolution cards you need, as well as getting those key Drowsy to put down on your bench. Plus Power's in here just to get that extra 10. This is especially helpful with Gloom's Poison Powder attack. It deals 10 damage, and you know your opponent's going to be taking 10 between turns. So if you need to deal that extra 10 or 20 damage, just so you know that in between turns the extra 10 will knock them out or get them to the certain amount of damage you want, that you can be able to do that. One of the greatest positions you can be in with this deck is to have your opponent be both asleep and poisoned. That's really going to want them to force that swap. They're going to have to go to the bench, and that's where Dark Dugtrio's ability comes in. So if you can poison them with Dark Gloom's attack, and then you have that trainer as backup to your Drowsy. So if you don't have the Drowsy on your bench, you can play the Sleep Trainer card. You get to flip a coin, so if heads, your opponent is asleep. That gives you another chance at putting a special condition on them. Rocket Sneak Attack is in there for another disruption card. It makes sure that if they have any switch cards or full heals in their hand, you can look at their hand and toss it back into their deck so that they have a decreased chance of getting out of that special condition without swapping. So the main point of this deck is really just to put your opponent in a spot where you make them feel like they really have to switch their active. You have Item Finder in there so that you can recycle your plus powers, your sleep card, Boss's Way, full heals, all of these utility cards that you need to really get this deck going and put your opponent in a bad spot. An ideal start for this deck is to have a challenge or a Professor Oak in your opening hand. You can challenge your opponent. If they accept, you can fill up your bench with Drowsy, Diglett, and Oddish. And if they don't, you can still draw those 2 cards and it helps you get a better start. But the Professor Oak will really help you get all 3 of those cards set up. Hopefully you can also get some Boss's Way in your hand. That way you've got the evolutions ready to go next turn. And I run 3 Nightly Garbage Run in this deck instead of the standard 2 because I'm running so many Professor Oaks and because I'm going to be relying on them that much to get what I need in my hand. And also, if one of the key Pokemon get knocked out, like a Dugtrio, Gloom, or a Drowsy, I'm able to put those right back in my deck and recycle them. So almost always on turn 2, you're able to have at least one Dugtrio on the bench. Ideally, you want to have a Gloom as your attacker because Poison is the best way to force a swap on your opponent. They don't want to take that 10 extra damage between turns. It's too risky in getting their setup going the right way. And one of the reasons this deck can be really annoying for your opponent and work so well is because these abilities can stack. So if you have 3 Dugtrio on your bench, if they retreat, they have to flip 3 coins, which could deal up to 60 damage to their active, which can be devastating, especially if they're poisoned. And that's not even considering what happens if they stay in. They can get poisoned, they can be put to sleep, they can be given confusion. Any number of bad things can happen to their active if they keep it in. So your opponent really has to weigh out what they're going to do. You put them in a spot where they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't. If they retreat, they're probably going to be taking damage. If they stay in, they're definitely going to be taking damage. But at the same time, these can be really easy to get around. If your opponent is also using Drowsy, which was really common after the Rocket expansion came out, they're probably going to be using Full Heal Energy, which can be really annoying for this deck because it ruins what you have set up. And Gloom, Dugtrio, Drowsy, they all have really low HP, so if your opponent's running a Haymaker, but they use Full Heal Energy in it, or they have Potion Energy, they can really ruin your setup that way. However, a lot of decks at the time also had Poke Powers like Blastoise, Venusaur, Alakazam, Mr. Mime. If you put them to sleep, if you confuse them, those powers shut down. And that really gives you the advantage in those matchups. Whenever I was first playtesting this deck, I built it around Dark Primeape, which it deals more damage if it's confused. So Dark Primeape could be an additional substitute if you wanted to focus mainly on confusion and not sleep. So you could replace those Drowsy with Mankey and Dark Primeape. And those cards are really powerful if they work, but what I kept running into is my Primeape would hit itself in confusion and deal that extra damage and basically knock itself out. So it didn't work as well. But if you're more of a risk taker and you like taking that kind of risk when you attack, Dark Primeape is a great addition to this deck. The reason I took out the Primeape and replaced them with Drowsy is because Drowsy is just more consistent. Even though you can put yourself to sleep, you can do up to 3 coin flips to put your opponent to sleep. If in the process you put your own active to sleep, you have Full Heal, you have Item Finder to recycle those Full Heals and take care of your own Pokemon while you're ruining your opponent's side of the field. The one card that this deck just cannot handle is Chansey. Chansey doesn't give a shit about being poisoned or paralyzed or confused or asleep because it's mainly there to use Pokemon Center on. Sponge decks are really tough to go against with this build, mainly because of Chansey. You can also get in trouble with decks that run 4 copies of Switch. Rocket Sneak Attack is in there to try to keep them from using Switch, but Dugtrio's ability doesn't work when your opponent uses a trainer to retreat to the bench. It's only when they're retreating the regular way. A lot of common decks like Wigglytuff and Rain Dance use Switch because they have Pokemon that have higher retreat costs that they don't want to risk, so you do have to watch out for those. But I will say that in playtesting this deck, Wigglytuff does not work very well against this deck. Dugtrio, as your active, can really destroy a Wigglytuff deck quickly, especially if you stack those special conditions on them. They can't do much without swapping out and then swapping back in with the help of a Scyther. So if you can keep them from getting that switch, you can really mess up a Wigglytuff deck, which is the main deck that was used in this format. Or if you really want to take the disruption aspect of this deck to the next level, you could take in 1 or 2 Dark Vileplume. Dark Vileplume has a Hay Fever ability that stops your opponent from using any trainers. It also stops you from using trainers, though, so you can always play everything you want from your hand, evolve into Dark Vileplume, and then from there on out start using all of the abilities that you have on the field with Dark Gloom and Drowsy. So that would work really well too. I couldn't quite find room for it in this deck because there was so much I wanted to pack into it, but it's definitely an option. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know down in the comments what you think of this low budget rogue rocket deck. And until next time, guys, bye. Oh, you want to retreat to the bench? You think it's safe there? Look at this guy. He knows where you live, and he will bust up through the fucking floorboards of your bedroom to get to you.